Hi, my name's Tim Lenton. I'm a regenerative designer, and I've been working the past couple of months on the application of the positive tipping points methodology from Tim Lenton at Exeter University to resilience in NHS digital systems. So this is in parallel with the work that Transform have been doing on modelling NHS digital systems, and you'll see the differences as we go through. So I just wanted to take you through the findings of this work. There's an accompanying report which goes into a lot more detail, but this is the headline findings from it. Bring up my screen. So yeah, we're looking at positive tipping points in the NHS digital systems. But just to start with, I want to tell you a story. So it's, some of you remember this. Some of you have read about it afterwards. It's July 19th, 2022, and London, like most of the country, experienced record-breaking temperatures. So it hit up to 40 degrees that day. And over the course of the day, there were two separate data centre failures at Guy's and St Thomas's that were associated with the heatwave. And that took down most of the clinical systems at Guy's and St Thomas and all their related community services. So the impact took out 371 clinical and non-clinical systems, patient records, electronic prescribing, electronic ordering, e-notation, and it caused massive widespread disruption because there were lots of impacts on other parts of the health service outside of the Guy's and St Thomas area, because system diverts moved lots of people to different parts of the healthcare service. During the outage, the Trust's activity fell massively. That week they only managed 64% of referrals, 68% of diagnostics, 71% of elective surgeries. And as a result, the Trust of the outage, the Trust incurred 1.4 million spending on technology and backup to respond to the incident. The incident started on the 19th of July and it was stood down on the 21st of September. And really, this was our wake-up call. This is the sort of incident that we're going to see much, much more in future. And it's just the sort of thing that this research has looked at to understand how things could have been different, particularly when we apply this positive tipping points methodology. So what are positive tipping points? Well, the work emerged from other work that was being led by Exeter on negative environmental tipping points. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's basically massive system changes in Earth systems, such as the turning off of the Gulf Stream, of the Atlantic current, the melting of permafrost, the melting of glaciers, big system changes which are self-reinforcing due to positive feedback and build momentum towards widespread impact. They're often abrupt and non-linear, and particularly in Earth systems, the change is often irreversible as the system state has changed. So the methodology uses this analogy of a ball on a curve, and you can see that the tipping point, it naturally wants to rest at the bottom of that basin. So it takes a lot of effort to move the system state over the tipping point into a different state from basin A to basin B. So that's basically what we're looking at when we talk about tipping points. So it takes a systematic approach to the positive tipping points methodology. Takes a systematic approach to understanding how can we trigger these desired outcomes by cultivating agency and intention. And there's a well-defined methodology. The team at Exeter have done a brilliant job of putting the methodology out there. So basically, you look at your system, and then you try and identify where your challenge points are, where there might be tipping points. And then for each of those, you look at, well, what are the enabling conditions? What are the feedback loops associated with each of those different tipping points? What are the indicators you could establish to understand what's happening within the system? And then really the crux of it, and this is where we've not got to with this research, because this has all been desk-based looking at the application of it, but the crux of it is, could we trigger any of these positive tipping points to create some substantive change within the system? before I get into the actual findings of it, let's take a quick step back and look at the context for this. So, like I said, positive tipping points emerged from work that Exeter had done actually on negative environmental tipping points. And the crucial thing here is that they realised that system change was often abrupt and non-linear, in contrast to most climate modelling which had gone before, which basically flattened out the direction of trend into a nice linear pattern. And they discovered that that's not how systems change. It's not nice and linear. Systems change very slowly, and then all of a sudden, it's like, you know, you'll have heard the boiling frog analogy, and it's hard to see the change that's happening all around you. And you've heard about black swans. You know, the incident that happens completely out of the blue that no one was expecting. Well, this is like both of those, really. We're like the boiling frog and the black swan in that we can't see the change that's happening all around us, and yet when it happens, it's going to be massive and abrupt. I'm not going to lie. As someone who works in this area, this idea of negative environmental tipping points is a really difficult one to deal with, because it forces you to face the reality of what's going to happen. We're already at 1.5 degrees of warning. There are 6 likely the most likely environmental tipping points. And the policies that we've got on the books are likely to take us to 3 degrees of warming. And that's going to trigger 4 of the 6 most likely Earth systems tipping points. So that's die-off of coral reef, that's melting of the West Antarctic glacier, that's a collapse of the subpolar gyre, and melting of mountain glaciers. If we go a bit beyond that, we're likely to see things like the turning off of the Atlantic Meridical, the Gulf Stream, and dieback of the Amazon forest. And the thing is that each one of these cascades into others, so one tipping point in Earth systems makes others more likely. It's grim stuff. So we're thinking in systems, and there's been lots of work in the past looking at this as to how you influence systems. And there was a great systems thinker called Donella Meadows who looked at this extensively and demonstrated that really the most powerful leverage points in a system are about mindset and goals of the system. They're the ones over on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side. So mindset and goals of the system are the 2 most powerful points of leverage. And yet most of our interventions take place in terms of materials and stocks, or changing in information flows or patterns of behaviour, much less influential aspects to intervene in the system. Because we're looking at resilience, it's worth just unpicking that a little, just to explain what resilience is. So, you know, resilience, capacity of a system to deal with change and to continue to function or recover rapidly. And it works, you can divide it down into 6 individual principles. So diversity, how diverse is our system. Dispersity, how distributed is the system, or conversely, how centralized is it. Autarky, how self-sufficient is the system. Adaptability, so how good is the system at responding to things, how agile is the system. And transformability, and that is the ability of the system to see itself and to reflect on that and create change. And basically the upshot of looking at resilience is that to create resilient systems, we have to take a long-term whole systems view and accept that higher short-term costs mean that we have the buffers, the diversity and the redundancy that are invaluable in providing system resilience. So the report goes into a whole load of detail about not just ways that we can understand those things, but methods that we can use to respond, which are common to the toolkit of regenerative practitioners like me. So we've got things like the understanding of the difference between a complicated system, which ultimately is knowable, and complex systems that are unknowable. it's basically like a bike is a complicated system. It looks, all the bits go together and you know what they do. You can take it apart and you can put it back together again. As soon as you put a bicycle or a cyclist on it, then it becomes a complex system because you can't fully know it. You can't predict behaviour because of the human element. There's Three Horizons framework that helps us develop a long-term view of what's happening in systems change, and also what's bridging between the present parts of the system which are in decline and the future parts of the system which are emerging. Linked to that, there's a model called Theory U, which is really about connecting to the mindset of the people within the system and helping people within the system develop an awareness of the system and how it works and their influence on it, and using that awareness to create change. And then the report also talks about alternative models or alternative forms of capital. So often we're used to thinking about financial capital, maybe intellectual capital, maybe social capital, but different researchers have identified up to 8 different forms of capital. Organisations like Yorkshire Water use 6 capitals in their accounting, and basically by looking at other forms of value, we can understand how we can resolve this fundamental tension between resilience and efficiency. Because efficiency is usually just measured on cost. How much is it going to cost? How much time is it going to take? And that often reduces the resilience of the system. So I've not gone into detail, but the report's got lots of these methods packed into it that enable us to understand, well, how can we create change? How can we do this differently? So what did it involve, this piece of work? Well, basically it started with a whole load of pattern spotting. So looking at the reports coming out of guys in St Thomas, the work that's happening in Somerset on resilience there, looking at the work that's happening through the transform model, and really trying to identify what are the groupings, what are the key challenges and the key opportunities that are emerging from all this from all this literature. And what that took us to were basically 2 aspects of positive tipping points that are there within the system. One is about enhancing non-technical resilience, and the other is about enhancing technical resilience. I mentioned non-technical resilience first, basically because we go back to that thing about leverage. The most impactful, the most powerful points of leverage on a system are around mindset rather than rules and behaviours. And yet most of the data points that we're currently working on to work with resilience aren't about mindset. They're about, specific physical interventions, as opposed to the more powerful levers of, social, cultural, psychological type stuff. The analogy I've drawn out there is Maslow's hammer. If the only tool you've got hammer, it's tempting to treat everything as if it was a nail. So it's tempting to try and use technical solutions to solve digital resilience when there are other non-technical solutions which are more powerful. So let's look at those first. So what's come out from this research is 6 different tipping points in non-technical resilience. First being decision makers prioritizing resilience and long-term thinking amidst day-to-day working. Difficult to do to look to the long term, particularly in a really hard-pressed, busy environment. But being able to do that and effectively doing that will be incredibly powerful for resilience in digital systems. The next one is about taking that understanding from decision makers down to staff and teams within the NHS and their suppliers, so that climate resilience is viewed as essential and a shared responsibility amongst all parts of the system. Responding better to incidents and better learning from them is another key positive tipping point that we've identified. In the Guy's and St Thomas example, one of the things that they could have done in the incident was they could have maybe prevented the overheating by spraying some of the air conditioning units outside with water to cool them down. But they never practiced that, and when it came to it, the hose pipe wasn't long enough to reach where the condensers were. So it took them an awful lot of time to start spraying these to cool them down because they'd never practiced it. And that sort of learning needs to be shared much better between organisations. one of the other things that emerged in the research was this idea about the cognitive debt that you incur when you outsource systems, services, and stuff to third party suppliers. You don't necessarily know how things work. You don't necessarily know how resilient they are, and you don't necessarily know what control you're going to have, even if things do start to go wrong. Again, Guys and Sir Thomas found that one of the big problems was unclear roles and responsibilities, and that gets much worse when you start to push out services to third party suppliers. The final two here are really about networked resilience. So one is about establishing a reciprocal resilience network with other local institutions. Somerset are doing this already with Somerset Council. Most places have already got some sort of anchor institutions network where the bigger institutions talk to each other. But doing that in the context of climate resilience is a really powerful way to all be stronger together. And then linked to that, but slightly different, is about the idea of nature-based resilience. So if you plant more trees, and then that reduces your urban heat effect, so that your air conditioning units are less likely to overheat. That's one way of doing it. And if you're managing floodwaters through natural drainage, so that places don't get flooded out, another great example. But you can't do that on your own as one institution in a locale. You need to work together with others to make it more effective. That's the non-technical stuff. So for each one of those, the paper looks at the enabling conditions that need to be in place to make those more likely, and the feedback loops which work on those. So you can dive into the paper for more details on that. And then looking at enhancing technical resilience, well, really these are in a sort of timescale basis. So the key one would be understanding the risk better. There's lots of legacy vulnerabilities that are there in the system, and risk and resilience aren't often treated as a higher priority as they could be. So getting a better handle on the risk of the system, the vulnerability of the system, would be massively useful. Building on that and looking to the now and the future, if investment and procurement can balance resilience with complexity, that would be a massive leap forward, because often resilience is sacrificed because it's not easy to see in the system and it looks like a cost. And then the third, technical resilience, is really about understanding the likely impact of climate change. I've talked about some of the changes that we're going to see there. So the long-term impact of it, and then the specific unfolding of climate incidents when they happen. So using things like sensors and data and communications to link it all together. The whole model is based around feedback loops. So this is the part of the system that we can see. So these are all this matrix here basically comes from the methodology, and it looks at different sorts of feedback loop, like social contagion, learning by doing, percolation, economies of scale, economies of networks, technical reinforcement. So all these are feedback loops that occur in the system. So you can see that we're social animals. People are influenced by peers, friends, neighbours. So if lots of your friends and peers have got solar panels, you're more likely to have solar panels. Listening to what's happening and being able to learn by doing and iterate and improve on stuff is another key feedback. Percolation, the spread of ideas or viruses in a negative sense is another key feedback loop. Economies of scale often come into it. This is particularly in the case of technical technical tipping points. The more you buy of something, the cheaper it gets because economies of scale start to kick in. The fundamental one that occurred in every instance was economies of network. So the more people who are using a product or a service, say a social media app, the more people on a social media app, the more others are likely to use it because improves. And it's the same, particularly with resilience in connected networks. The more parts of the system that are resilient, the less likely to get those cascading failures. And then we've got tech reinforcement and other forms of reinforcement, like investment reinforcement as well. So you can think of this as, apps for our smartphone get us to use smartphones more, and there's a positive feedback loop between there. So what the model, what this approach does is start to try to fit all these together and try and understand it, but not in a reductive sort of way. So again, remember this isn't a complicated system; it's a complex system. So for all that we can understand the feedback loops as best we can, it's only a partial understanding. All models are wrong, but sometimes useful, and I guess that's what this is trying to get to. But to move past that reductive approach, the model also encourages the shift to looking at stuff from the other end, from a more narrative based approach. And the report develops a few alternative narratives that give us fresh perspectives on the resilience of NHS digital systems. Like the institutional load of outsourcing, I've talked about this idea of cognitive debt, that you incur a debt when someone else is running something on your behalf, and we don't take account of that. Lots of the digital resilience papers talk about making people trust digital, and there's a good reason for that. We want people to use digital systems and use them effectively and have confidence in them. But that can contribute to that. I'm just going to hand it over and forget what's going on behind the scenes. So flipping that on its head, what happens when we don't trust digital, and when we're forced to create a manual backup or a workaround? Guys in St Thomas had to put in place a paper hospital, so they had to reconstruct their processes from pen and paper. So the idea of, if we don't trust digital, what knowledge do we hang on to, could be really powerful within this. And then another one as well, I think if you talked about climate incident resilience, to most people, the image they would have in their head would be lots of soldiers filling up sandbags and preparing to deal with flooding. But increasing the reality of this is that it's healthcare staff that are the last line of defence to climate incidents, and most climate incidents are actually measured in terms of their impact on healthcare. It's often down to the increased mortality rates and things like that. So healthcare is often underestimated, but really the NHS staff are turning into an army of climate responders in many instances. When we look to how to put these in place, the report makes some suggestions for how we might do that, and particularly focusing on those non-technical positive tipping points as intervention points, and make some suggestions for workshops and exercises that can bring this to life and help people internalize it. So it's more less training and more an exercise in taking this on board. But really, that needs to be developed through small world networks. So not lots of individual little cells, but equally not bringing this to teams of exactly the same sort of people. So not introducing this to an entire tranche of sustainability professionals or resilience professionals, but because you get groupthink and that lack of diversity. Remember, diversity being a key part of resilience. There is a danger of groupthink. So the most effective way to take this out is really to develop diverse groups of different people. So you could take your sustainability lead and your facilities lead and your resilience director and someone from the ambulance service and someone from the nursing and someone from community healthcare. Bring them all together so that you get this small world way of working across institutions, places, and professions that then propagates the ideas further. So yeah, but really what we're talking about is how you can put this into place and what triggers you can apply to trigger positive tipping points. But the important thing is to recognise that institutions are very good at balancing things out and maintaining the status quo. So the key thing to do is identify where can we have the biggest impact earliest on, and how do we work out from there. So in our example, we've seen that because of the nature of systems, because non-technical solutions are often overlooked elsewhere, and because mindset and goals are the most powerful parts of the system to intervene in, those are the bits that this work suggests that we start on working with, and we use that toolkit that I was talking about at the beginning. So there you go. I hope that was useful. That is the application of positive tipping points to climate resilience in NHS digital systems. There's a report accompanying it. You can dig into all the tipping points, and there's also some suggestions of ways forward. If you've got any queries about it, you can get in touch with me. I'm Tim Freno. I'm hello@timfrenoand.co. Thanks.